Okay, this is 11 honors. We're kind of reviewing 11 and actually chapter 12. What else? He dies, and that statement, the red sun was pasted in the sky like a wafer. Why is that significant? Yes. Who sacrificed for whom? For Henry. But how did he do? I mean, he didn't consciously die for Henry. He died because he was in the war and all. But in a way, how did he die for Henry? What has he already done? What has his death already done for Henry? You mentioned it.
Encourages him.
Which encouraged him what way? You think, okay, I'm out of here. My best friend just died.
Keep going. Stop running away from the battle to get revenge.
Yes, it's anger. For the first time in the book, he's angry at something. What had he been angry at? Like, what had he been worried about up to this point?
Himself.
Yes. And now, what's he worried about? Those guys over there that just killed my best friend. And it makes him mad. And you can't really be a good soldier without that. And so that's, in a way, you see how Jim's death is saving Henry. Because now he is going to be, we hope, he's heading in that direction, a good soldier. How does every soldier's death a sacrifice? Like, we even call it that. Did y'all have, have y'all had that class, Ms. Roberts' class? Your substitute, did he tell you who he was?
Yes.
Did he tell you anything about his background?
He was in the Marines.
Right. So, I mean, he didn't die. He doesn't look like he was wounded. But his service, 1% or something like 2% of Americans protect the 98%. So only about 2% actually join the military, and they fight the wars that you and I don't have to fight. So, in a sense, he sacrificed 2 years or 4 years. I don't know how long he was in. All right, so chapter 10. Would you write this if you haven't already? This is Henry Deserts the Tattered Soldier. Make sure you have a title for these things. I think it'd be very important for you to study. So if you didn't write it, did you write it? Have you written that down? Give it a title. Henry Deserts the Tattered Man. Why was that so terrible?
I think it's chapter 10 or 12.
Well, we're reviewing 10.
Can I go to the bathroom?
Yes.
I'm gonna try and get out of the question here. Yes, actually.
I've got one for you when you come back. You can't stay forever. She'll be back.
What was the title? He meets the tattered.
Henry deserts the tattered soldier. Why was that significant? He deserted a guy. I mean, just why would that be a significant thing in your life if you left a guy?
He felt that?
Well, he did, because he deserted him because he was dying. He didn't want to see him die, and the man will probably die out there alone. And Henry left him. It's the kind of thing he can't undo. Like, this is the one thing in the book that he remembers up to the last page of the book. He can forgive his running away because he actually gets a second chance. But he can't forgive him leading this guy because he doesn't have a second chance. You don't have to be personal about it, but have you ever, two questions. Have you ever had anything that have you ever had any do-overs in life? You ever had anything that you literally had a second chance of doing and it was better, right? Have you ever had something that you knew you couldn't do over? It was fixed forever, whatever it was. You could never go back and undo. You ever had any of those? I don't know what they are, but those are the ones you live with. The ones you never get a second chance to make it right. If you always feel like there's gonna be a second chance, then you're okay. Anyway, that's 10. Turn to 11. And I want you to write these as notes. All right, so 11, this is, he wanders the battlefield. That's the title. Write it down. He wanders the battlefield. All right. You have to understand this. Henry does not make a decision to go back to his unit. He never makes that decision. He does get back to his unit, but it wasn't as a result of a decision he made to do it. So this chapter, remember, he makes up excuses for not going back. He's beginning to change because his friend died, and he's now angry at the enemy, but he can't make up. What is his primary reason for not wanting to go back?
Guilty. Or he doesn't want to die.
Well, those are two different reasons. And I think the second reason is no longer it. I don't think that's the reason anymore. He's not as worried about dying because he's angry. He won't, he's seen death and he's angry. He's not really thinking about that. It's the first one.
He doesn't want people to notice that he wasn't fighting.
It's the shame. He doesn't want to be shamed when he goes back. So he thinks of all these reasons why he can't go, and none of them are legitimate. Like he says he doesn't have a rifle. Why is that not a legitimate excuse?
Because he can't fight.
But it's not legitimate because
Well, yeah,
why is that not a legitimate excuse?
because there's guns like everywhere.
All over the place. He's hungry. He's tired. He's thirsty. I mean, that's kind of like being a baby about things. And then he realizes, well, they're going to lose anyway, but then he realizes they're not going to lose anyway. And so all of his excuses are pointless. And so we go to chapter 12. Chapter 12, I wrote, Henry gets his red badge of courage, which is extremely, it's the name of the book, title of the book. So how does he get it? How does he get his red badge of courage?
He got hit on the head.
Yes. How did that happen? What?
It like grazed his head.
Well, that was what Wilson thought happened, and that's what he said happened. He said he got shot, but that's not how it happened. He actually got hit on the head by a rifle. How did that happen? Who hit him on the head with a rifle? What?
Lieutenant.
Well, it wasn't a lieutenant, but it was one of his own men. It was one of his own people. It wasn't the enemy. He got hit on the head by one of his own guys. And why did that happen? What's he fighting with his own men for? Because he tried to stop him. Remember, this unit goes into battle and then runs back. And he's trying to figure out why. So he stops this guy to try to figure out what's happening. And the guy, to get away, you'll see it in the movie, hits him on the head. So how does he get back to his unit?
He just runs off with the rest of the men that are running.
No, he collapsed. He collapses right there. So he's out cold, and it's nighttime. And he's lost. He's hurting. He doesn't know where he is. He's half unconscious. So how does that guy get back to his unit?
Isn't there a part where he like runs off and then he has really blurry vision so he can't really see that well or something?
Somebody finds him and helps him.
Well, that's not this time. What happens this time is somebody finds him
Ooh.
and helps him. And his name is the Cheery Soldier, which means he doesn't have a name at all. It's just the description of it. Would you turn to 74? Did we talk about this? I don't know if we did or not. 74. All right, this guy helps him back to his unit. So please don't tell me that that Henry makes a decision to go back to his unit. He grows up. He's now a man. He wants to go back and fight. No, he doesn't make that decision. He's taken back. Look at page 74. All right. In the search which followed, this is the man, the cheery soldier, taking him back home. The man of the cheery voice seemed to the youth to possess a wand of a magic kind. Circle that. Magic wand. Wand and magic. Circle it. Underline.
Wait, where is this?
It's top of page 74. In search. In the search. All right. He threaded the mazes and the tangled forests with strange fortune. Circle that. Strange fortune. He encounters with guards and patrols. He displayed the keenness of a detective and the valor of a gamin. Obstacles fell before him. Circle that. Obstacles fell before him. And became of assistance. The youth, with his chin still on his breast, stood woodenly by while his companion beat ways and means out of sullen things. The forest seemed a vast hive of men buzzing about in frantic circles, but the cheery man conducted the youth without mistakes. Underline that. Circle it. The cheery man conducted the youth without mistakes. And then look at the last sentence at the bottom. And he who had so befriended him was thus passing out of his life. It suddenly occurred to the youth that he had not once seen his face. So you put all that together, the cheery soldier is described as having a magic wand, strange fortune, obstacles fell before him, he conducted youth without mistakes, and then when he just lets him off and then he leaves, and Henry realized he never saw what he looked like. What do you think the author is doing here? What are you supposed to make of that?
It's an angel.
Well, it's certainly like that. The only thing, I wrote that too. But the reason I don't think it's an angel, because I don't think this guy believes in angels. He's a naturalist. He believes in forces that control us, that are maybe like supernatural. But I would argue that this is a good example of how Henry, he's out of control. He's not in control of his life. Other forces are doing this for him. All right, you got that? I think that's important. All right, chapter 13. Where do we need to start? 15. We're still. Chapter 13. Henry returns. So that's the name of the chapter. Henry returns. And he meets Wilson. This is basically about his friend Wilson. How has Wilson changed? Do you remember?
He had like a temper.
He used to have a temper. What's he now? What?
He's nice.
He's kind. He's calm. He's gentle. He takes care of Henry's head. Look on page 76, top of the page. His friend had stepped forward quickly. Circle his friend. That's the first time in the book that Wilson is called that. So he's now suddenly, from that loud soldier to Wilson, has now become Henry's friend. All right, so he treats him real gently. He even breaks up a fight. He gives him his blanket. So he's just a different guy. He even he even compliments Henry, saying, wow, most people would be yelling and screaming, but not you. All right. Chapter 14. And I wrote the title, I want you to put, Wilson is a changed man. So this focuses on Wilson. And it's more of the same. We find out that he, like I said, he breaks up a fight. What was he like yesterday? Yesterday, when we first met him. You said that he was loud.
Oh. Yeah, he was loud and quick-tempered.
Yeah, quick temper. He got in a fight with Jim Conklin. So yesterday he was a troublemaker. Today he's a peacemaker. He really is. He's making peace. By the way, did we mention Jim Conklin's initials? What are Jim Conklin's initials? JC. Yeah. Who else has those initials? Someone else who sacrificed his life for people.
Jesus Christ.
So I think there's another way the author is sort of pointing in that direction, that we're supposed to see Jim Conklin in that way, as someone who sacrificed his life for him. All right, let's go to 15. I won't, Sarah, do you mind starting? We're going to read a little bit. I got my eye on the clock, so we can watch some of this movie. 140. So we'll go to about 1. Try to go to about 1.
The regiment was standing
side of a lane, waiting for the command to march. When suddenly the youth remembered the little packet wrapped in a faded yellow envelope which the loud young soldier with lugubrious words had entrusted to him. It made him start. He uttered an exclamation and turned towards his comrade. Wilson, what? His friend at his side in the ranks was thoughtfully staring down the road. From some cause, his expression was at the moment very meek. The youth, regarding him with sidelong glances, felt impelled to change his purpose. Oh, nothing, he said. His friend turned to his side in some surprise. Why, what was he gonna say? Oh, nothing, repeated the youth. He resolved not to deal with the little blow. It was sufficient that the fact made him glad. It was not necessary to knock his friend on the head with the misguided packet. He had been possessed of much fear of his friend, for he saw how easily questionings could make holes in his feelings. Lately he had assured himself that the altered comrade would not tantalize him with a persistent curiosity. But he felt certain that during the first period of leisure, his friend would ask him to relate his adventures of the previous day. He now rejoiced in the possession of a small weapon with which he could prostrate his comrade at first signs of cross-examination. He was master. It would now be he who could laugh and shoot the shafts of derision.
Okay, he's holding the letters that Wilson gave him yesterday. How is it a weapon for him? How's he holding on to it? What does he plan to do with it? To understand how that...
Can he like, sort of like expose Wilson or like act on him if he keeps the letters? So if Wilson tries to like say something about Henry running away, he can like say something back to him about the letters or something?
You're absolutely right. My question is though, how would those letters embarrass Wilson? Like, what is it about the letters that would make Wilson embarrassed if Henry made a big deal about it? Why did he give him the letters? Why did Wilson give Henry the letters? Isn't that sort of a natural thing? You think you're gonna die, so you give these letters to Henry and you say, please give them to my mother or whoever. Isn't that part of it? So now he can say, you were afraid yesterday. Look at these letters. You thought you were gonna die. You made such a big deal out of it yesterday. So I think that's what he's doing. What does that say about Henry? Remember, Wilson has changed. What about Henry?
He still has his guard up about what
Yes,
to do.
that's a really good way to put it. He's still got his guard up. He's still not complete, like, Wilson seemed to be totally vulnerable now. He's just completely natural and normal. Look on page 86, the last paragraph, long paragraph. He did not give a great deal of thought. Do you see that? All right. He did not give a great deal of thought to these battles that lay directly before him. It was not essential that he should plan his ways in regard to them. He had been taught that many obligations of life were easily avoided. The lessons of yesterday had been that retribution was a laggard and blind. So he thinks he got away with what? What did he get away with? Delaney, what did he get away with?
Wilson?
Yes. No, I'm sorry. This is Henry.
Mm-hmm.
What did he do yesterday that he's embarrassed and ashamed of?
Ran away.
But he got away with it. Nobody's calling him on it. Nobody's calling him a coward. So that's not the lesson that we usually think of, is it? You got to pay for it. But he said, no, I got away with it. But somehow the fact that he got away with it actually encourages him. It says he had, below that, he says, a faith in himself had secretly blossomed. So he's actually becoming a little more confident about him, his abilities. Eventually he gives the letters back to him. All right, we'll keep reading. The friend, would you start there, Aurora? The friend in a weak hour.
What page?
85.
Oh, wait, back. The friend had in a weak hour spoken with sobs of his own death. He had delivered a melancholy oration previous to his funeral, and had doubtless in the pack of letters presented various keepsakes to to relatives, but he had not died, and thus he had delivered himself into the hands of the youth. The latter felt immensely superior to his friend, but he inclined to
Condescension.
condescension. He adopted toward him an air of patronizing good humor. His self-pride was now entirely restored. In the shade of its flourishing growth, he stood with braced and self-confident legs. And since nothing could now be discovered, he did not shrink from an encounter with the eyes of judges, and allowed no thoughts of his own to keep him from an attitude of manfulness. He had performed his mistakes in the dark, so he was still a man.
Sort of underline that. What does that mean? What does his thinking mean? He performed his mistakes in the dark, so he was still a man. Because he wasn't caught. They didn't find out. How does that make him a man? What does he mean by that? It's kind of ironic.
No one saw him do it.
No one saw him do it, so what does it mean he was still a man?
People still had, like, no one knew that he was, like, afraid, I guess, so he felt like if people didn't know that, then they would still have respect for him.
That's well said. The funny thing about it is if you don't get caught doing something, does that mean you're not guilty of doing it? No, of course not. But he seems to think that's the case. He's not a coward because they didn't catch him in being a coward. So, and of course, he's completely wrong about that. He was a coward, and he did do that, and he should feel guilty. You want to read a little more?
Indeed, when he remembered his fortunes of yesterday and looked at them from a distance, he began to see something fine there. He had license to be pompous and better in life. His painting agonies of the past he put out of his sight. In the present, he declared to himself that it was only the doomed and the
Damned.
who roared with sincerity at circumstances. Few but they ever did it. A man with a full stomach and the respect of his fellows had no business to scold about anything that he might think to be wrong in the ways of the universe, or even with the ways of society. Let the unfortunates rail, the others may play marbles. He did not give a great deal of thought to these battles that lay directly before him. It was not essential that he should plan his ways in regard to them. He had been taught that many obligations of life were easily avoided. The lessons of yesterday had been retribution was a laggard and blind. With these facts before him, he did not deem it necessary that he should become feverish over the possibilities of the ensuing 24 hours. He could leave much to chance. Besides, a faith in himself had secretly blossomed. There was a little flower of confidence growing within him. He was now a man of experience. He had been out among the dragons, he said, and he assured himself that they were so hideous as he imagined them, or they were not so hideous as he had imagined them. Also, they were inaccurate. They did not sting with precision. A stout heart often defied, and defying escaped. And furthermore, how could they kill him who was chosen of gods and doomed to greatness?
See how he's also, in fact, he wasn't yesterday, but now he's overconfident. He thinks he's better than other people, and so he's sort of, as they say, doubling down. He's now, even though he is guilty of running, he thinks he's a hero. Thank you. Isabella, would you read?
He remembered how some of the men had run from battle. As he recalled their terror-struck faces, he felt a scornful. They had surely been more fleet and more wild than was absolutely necessary. They were weak ones. As for himself, he had blood and discretion and dignity. He was aroused from his reverie by his friend, who, having hitched about nervously and blinked at the trees for a time, suddenly coughed in an introductory way and spoke. "Lemon, what?" The friend put his hand up to his mouth and coughed again. He fidgeted in his jacket. Well, he gulped at last. I guess you might as well give me back the letters. Dark, prickling blood had flushed to his cheeks and brow. "All right, Wilson," said the youth. He loosened 2 buttons of his coat, thrust his hand in, and brought forth the packet. As he extended it to his friend, the latter's face was turned from him. He had been slow in the act of perusing the packet, because during it he had been trying to invent a remarkable comment upon the affair. He could conjure nothing of sufficient point. He was compelled to allow his friend to escape unmolested with his packet. And for this he took unto himself considerable credit. It was
I thought this was kind of interesting. We had just been talking about Henry got away with it, right? Right? Wilson got away with it. So they both get away with something that would have shown, because apparently when he gave him the letters, he also kind of whimpered and cried. He really thought he was gonna die. And so that's part of what makes it embarrassing. So they both got away with something. Would you mind reading to the bottom, and then Delaney can read? His friend at his side.
His friend at his side seemed suffering for reaching. As he contemplated him, he felt his heart grow more strong and stout. He had never been compelled to blush in such manner for his acts. He was an individual of extraordinary virtues. He reflected with condescending, too bad, the poor devil, it makes him feel tough. After this incident, and as he reviewed the battle pictures he had seen, he felt quite competent to return home and make the hearts of the people glow with story and joy. He could see himself in a room with warm tints, telling tales to listeners. He could exhibit wonders. They were insignificant, still, in a district where laurels were infrequent, they might shine. He saw a gaping audience pictured him as the central figure in blazing scenes. He imagined the consternation and the ejaculations of his mother and the young lady at the seminary as they drank his recital. Their vague feminine formula for beloved ones, doing brave deeds on the field of battle without risk of life would be destroyed.
All right, thank you. All right, so chapter 16, I'm gonna ask you to title this Prelude to Battle. So this is day 2. This is the chapter before he fights again. So and Delaney's gonna read, and I will read this, and hopefully we can read, stop about 1, so we got about 10 minutes.
The thundering of musketry was always to be heard. Later the cannon had entered the dispute. In the fog-filled air their voices made a thudding sound. The revolution was continued. This part of the world led a strange battleful existence. The youth regiment was marched to relieve a command that had lain long in some damp trenches. The men took positions behind a curving line of the rifle pits and had them turned on, like a large bird along the line of the woods. Before them, a level stretch people with short, deformed stumps. With the woods beyond came to dull popping of the skimmers and the pickets. Firing in the fog from the right came the noise of the terrific
Fracas. It means battle.
The men cuddled behind the small embankment and sat in an easy attitudes awaiting their turn. Many had their backs to the fire, and the youth's friend lay down, buried his face in his arms, and almost instantly it seemed he was in a deep sleep.
Before we go on, what does that tell you about the unit? Do you remember how they acted yesterday before they ever saw battle? You remember every time they'd stop, what they would do? Yeah, well, they would. And they'd also dig foxholes, and they would find a tree to hide behind, or they'd pile rocks up. What are they doing today?
Hiding behind
Go on. What else? How else are they described today?
Afraid.
Does it say that? It says the men cuddled. That's kind of an odd word. Cuddled behind a small embankment. That sounds like they're comfortable. And sat in easy attitudes awaiting their turn. They had their backs to the firing. The youth's friend lay down, buried his face in his arms, and almost instantly it seemed deep sleep. So how are they different today? They are used to it. So the unit is becoming more veteran as well as Henry. The unit is changing as well as Henry. Would you mind reading to the bottom?
The youth leaned his breast against the brown dirt and peered over at the woods, up and down the line. Currents of trees interfered with his ways and pushed him. You could see the long line of trenches, but for a short distance. A few idle flags were perched on the dirt hills. Behind them were rows of dark bodies with a few heads sticking curiously over the top. Always the noise of screamers came from the wood on the front and the left, and the din on the right had grown to frightful proportions. The guns were roaring without an instant's pause for breath. It seemed that the cannon had come from all parts and were engaged in a stupendous ring. It became impossible to make a sentence heard. The youth the guns refused to permit even a comment upon their uproar. He never successfully concluded the sentence, but at last the guns stopped, and among the people in the rifle pits, rumors again flew like birds. They were now of the most part black creatures who fought their wings dearly. Near to the ground and refused to rise on the wings of hope, the men's faces grew doleful from the interpreting of omens. Tales of hesitation and uncertainty on the part of those high in place of responsibility came to their ears. Stories of disasters were borne into their minds with many proofs. This din of musketry on the right, growing like a released genie of sound, expressed and emphasized the army's point.
Right. The men were disheartened and began to mutter. They made gestures expressive of the sentence, what more can we do? And it could always be seen that they were bewildered by the alleged news and could not fully comprehend a defeat. Before the gray mist had been totally obliterated by the sun rays, the regiment was marching in a spread column that was retiring carefully through the woods. The disordered, hurrying lines of the enemy could sometimes be seen down through the groves and little trees. They were yelling, shrill, and exultant. At this sight, the youth forgot many personal matters and became greatly enraged. He exploded in a loud sentence. But Jiminy, we're general by a lot of lunkheads. So they've actually retreating. Lunkheads. More than one feller has said that today, observed a man. His friend, recently aroused, was still drowsy. He looked behind him until his mind took in the meaning of the movement. Then he said, "Oh, well, I suppose we got licked," he remarked sadly. See, the unit's sad that they got beaten, that they seem to be retreating. The youth had thought that it would not be handsome for him to freely condemn other men. He made an attempt to restrain himself, but the words upon his tongue were too bitter. He presently began to look in intricate denunciation of the commander of the forces. Maybe it wasn't all his fault, not altogether. He did the best he knowed. It's our luck get licked off often. And said his friend in a weary tone. He was trudging along with stooped shoulders and shifting eyes like a man who had been caned and kicked. "Well, don't we fight like the devil? Don't we do all that men can?" demanded the youth loudly. He was secretly dumbfounded at this sentiment when it came from his lips. For a moment his face lost pallor and he looked guiltily about him. But no one questioned his right to deal such words. And presently he recovered his air of courage. He went on to repeat a statement he had heard going from group to group at the camp that morning. The brigadier said he never saw a regiment fight the way we fought yesterday, didn't he? And we didn't do better than many other regiments, did we? Well then, you can't say that it's the Army's fault, can you? To his reply, the friend's voice was stern. "Of course not," he said. "No man dare say we don't fight like the devil. No man will ever dare say it. The boys fight like hell roosters, but still, we don't have no luck." "Well then, if we fight like the devil and don't ever whip, it must be the general's fault," said the youth grandly and decisively. "And I don't see any sense in fighting. You're always losing, though some darned old lunkhead of a general." A sarcastic man was tramping at the youth's side and spoke. "Maybe you think you fit the whole battle yesterday, Fleming," he remarked. The speech pierced the youth. Inwardly he was reduced to an abject pulp by these chance words. His legs quaked privately. He cast a frightened glance at the sarcastic man. "Why, no," he hastened to say in a conciliating voice. "I don't think I fought the whole battle yesterday." But the other seemed innocent of any deeper meaning. Apparently he had no information. It was merely his habit. "Oh," he replied in the same tone of calm derision. The youth nevertheless felt a threat. His mind shrank from going near to the danger, and thereafter he was silent. The significance of the sarcastic man's words took from him all the loud moods that would make him appear prominent, and became suddenly a modest person. He was a low-toned There was low-tone talk among the troops. The officers were impatient and snappy, their countenances clouded with tales of misfortune. The troops shifting through the forest were sullen. In the youth's company, once a man's laugh rang out. A dozen soldiers turned their faces quickly toward him and frowned with vague displeasure. I'm gonna read one more. The noise of firing dogged their footsteps. Sometimes it seemed to be driven a little away, and always returned with increased insolence. The men uttered and cursed, throwing black looks in his direction. So we're gonna stop there. I want you to finish the story by Friday. It's 40 pages. The last page is 130. We're on page 91. So it's actually 39 pages. I'm gonna show you this movie, at least start to show it to you. It's not that long. The main character,